Interested in all things psychology? You are at the right place. Here, we bring exciting and thought-provoking ideas. We travel into our minds and some things out of this world. Welcome to the Psychology Debrief.
Hi, and welcome back to the channel. I'm joined today by Michal Chmiel, who's one of our social psychologists here at Royal Holloway. And in particular, Michal does a lot of work regarding fake news, which is what he's here to talk to me about today. I think, first of all, just so our listeners have a bit of an understanding as to what we mean by fake news and just a bit more of a scientific definition of what fake news is, can you kind of give our listeners an understanding about what we mean by this term?
Well, yes, happy to. Obviously, it's as with any term in science, we have a number of different definitions of fake news. We have also a number of different popular definitions of fake news, and some journalists would just say that fake news is anything that the former US President Donald Trump would say. Now, it's obviously not as simple as that. So fake news is essentially any untruthful content disseminated under the disguise of news reporting. So it's a subclass of misinformation. It's not true, and it's created for various different reasons. But essentially, it's untruthful content created under the disguise of something newsworthy, something that is intended to capture public attention and will essentially change their attitudes or behaviors.
I think it's probably fair to say that this isn't probably a new notion, that misinformation has probably been around for a long, long time. I don't know if there's been any sort of understanding as to why, particularly now we've reached this point where we talk about it in a kind of commonplace setting, whereas maybe some years ago it didn't seem to be such prominent in the kind of public consciousness. Do you know any kind of information about that?
Yeah, so obviously untruthful content created or disseminated systematically by various different organizations like governments and the church has been created for centuries, essentially to gain followers, to gain support for various political causes. So the very concept of spreading misinformation is not new. Kings used to do that, popes used to do that, various political leaders used to do that and still do that. Now, what is new is, I would say, along with a number of academics who are into this subject, is that people began to accept the very concept of the existence of fake information and fake news in the information sphere. That is, we know that it exists, and we kind of surprisingly have accepted the fact that some politicians may want to use it. And if we support those politicians, we also tend to accept the very concept of manipulating people by using fake information. So this is one specific condition of what we refer to as post-truth that has created this strange environment where, on one hand, leaders, decision makers spread misinformation and spread fake news. On the other hand, there are audiences that are happy to accept this and happy to use this. But obviously, this is only part of the problem. The other part of not necessarily the problem, but part of the modern times that we live in is social media and various systems, various platforms that enable fast spreading misinformation without checking its truthfulness, which resulted in something that we refer to as truthy messages. That is, messages that are obviously not true, but only disguised as or posing as truthful. So we have a certain condition of post-truth, and we have another certain condition of social media environment, which is very conducive to spreading different sorts of information, including fake and untruthful content.
Yeah, and I think an interesting question to kind of explore is, why do people, I mean, first of all, create and then also sort of share fake news? You've kind of already alluded to the idea that one function of misinformation is that it can kind of increase followership. That so, for example, in kind of political system, you can kind of disseminate misinformation about certain things, misrepresent certain things to maybe gain voters. But is it always as sort of straightforward as that? Is kind of fake news always necessarily have that kind of function? Is it always deliberate, I suppose, is another question that comes to my mind. Are we always assuming that politicians or other kind of political or certain leaders always do it from a deliberate perspective? And then I guess as a kind of additional sort of separate question, those are the people who potentially create and propagate misinformation, but why do some people share it? I assume most often it's shared because of people's lack of awareness of its lack of truthfulness. But is it, again, more complex than that? That's quite multifaceted. Maybe you can kind of illuminate on some of those aspects.
Yeah, they're very good indeed. They're very good questions indeed. And if we find answers to those questions, we would be far better off with, the democracy, least to say. So, as you said, multifaceted phenomenon. And first of all, about the creators of fake news. Now, it is very tricky because we can only say that someone is creating fake news to harm people when they are actually aware of the fact that they are spreading misinformation, that they are spreading untruthful content. So a certain degree of awareness has to exist. Obviously, somewhere in the middle of the spectrum between truth and lies is all those bits of information, all those messages which are difficult to qualify as either truthful or not. Now, this opens a very interesting avenue for philosophers of science, as there are different types of truths. Some of them are more easily identifiable, and some of them are more easily defined as either truthful or not. However, there is a very large group of, I would say, information-related messages related to emotions, related to religion, which are very subjective, and one cannot simply say, well, you are right or you are wrong. So there are certain groups of beliefs which are not easily identifiable or as truthful or not. Now, the last part of the problem is with the truth as a concept. Now, for, I would say, 2 decades now, we live in an environment that some academics would refer to as characterized by the death of expertise. That is, traditional sources of truth, traditional sources of authority or authoritative information are no longer regarded as such by various audiences. To put it in simple terms, when people have questions about different phenomena, they tend to no longer turn to academics or scientists or experts for answers. So those sources of traditional sources of verified information are no longer regarded as such by a vast majority of people. So why is that the case? One of the reasons, again, is underpinned by the whole notion of post-truth. That is, truth has become more subjective, more emotions dependent. So it's no longer important what is truthful objectively. It's sometimes more important what I feel about something, what it has, what effect it has made on me. So this very subjective, emotion-based or emotion-dependent concept of post-truth has emerged, which again made politicians, leaders, communicators realize, unfortunately, that truth may not be as important, objective truth may be as not important. So instead of asking what is truthful, they're asking what is truthful to you, which is a huge and dramatic and profound shift in how truth in the public sphere has been defined recently. So a number of different kind of elements of this phenomenon. Now, about the audiences, this is a slightly different problem. While we know that some decision makers, communicators will intentionally disseminate fake news and misinformation for political gains, for gaining followers, for building support for various causes. Now, with audiences, it's different. As you mentioned, many people may not be aware that something is truthful or not. They may identify messages as truthy, that is having those characteristics of truthfulness, but may not necessarily be 100% certain if they are then disseminating or sharing fake information. So part of the problem lies with identification of fake information. And it goes back to the sources of expertise and sources of credible information. And one of the ways of addressing that problem would be finding more truthful sources of information, more authoritative sources of information. Now, from a psychological perspective, and for myself, what is most interesting is a certain condition where people are fully aware that they spot fake content and still they intend to share it. Now, this is obviously kind of a act against the truth. An act of sharing fake information is act of being against truth. And there are a number of different theories or ideas why it may happen that even though people are aware of sharing fake information, they are still doing that. Now, one of the most interesting lines of explanation lies with self and group identity. Now, some research noticed that some people may have problems with self-esteem. So where the self-esteem is lower, they may intentionally share fake information in order to boost their self-esteem. Another group of people whose group identity is threatened also would tend to share fake information that is consistent with the language and with the communication and with the values and attitudes of their groups in order to boost their group self-esteem and their group identity. So they will be using fake news as means to address some of the problems with the group or self-identity. And what would motivate them is, for example, group coherence, group consistency, and just spreading values and communication and attitudes of their group, regardless of whether they are truthful or not.
I mean, I find what you're saying about how kind of humans' relationship with the truth is a bit of a tenuous one at times, I suppose. I find that really sort of interesting. It sounds to me like sometimes finding and knowing the truth, the real truth, isn't, if we can ever find one, that is as well, isn't always necessarily overly that important to us. It seems to be sometimes we care more about truths, and I kind of say truths in the way that you've sort of been defining the idea of truth as being somewhat relative, in a way that kind of confirms and conforms to maybe certain beliefs that we already hold, or, you know, for example, as you mentioned about self-esteem, may help us feel good about ourselves. And I think this whole issue about fake news and misinformation I find really fascinating is that, to me, given, and it's not just necessarily fake news that I think kind of demonstrates this issue, but it makes me wonder about how rational as human beings we truly are. We use this term Homo sapiens, which basically refers to wise man, this rational mode that we have. But I think probably what these kind of topics illuminate is how rational are we really? That's an interesting kind of philosophical question that I like to wonder about sometimes. And I think kind of what you've been illustrating is an interesting kind of point in relation to that, that people will sort of share information willingly when they know it's not true, or so easily can buy into information that isn't true just because it merely conforms to their pre-existing beliefs. And we see that not necessarily just with fake news, but also with, for example, police officers. And we've, throughout, it's kind of become quite popular with many miscarriages of justice about sort of tunnel vision in police investigations. But we often kind of engage in those things on a kind of daily basis. So I guess just to kind of finish up this discussion about fake news, what can we do about it? What is the best way as a society for us to try and combat some of these issues? How can we try and restore, or hopefully just generally improve, the quality of news that people consume, that it's more reliable, it's more truthful, and therefore, moreover, how can we ensure that people know how to detect what's reliable and truthful, and so therefore they don't fall into traps of propagating and furthering the spread of that misinformation?
Well, to answer your question, it's great that you touched on the concept of rationality. And like with this concept, depending on whom you ask, they would give you different definitions of rationality. We are psychologists. I'm a social psychologist myself, and I like the concept of ecological rationality. That is, we and our minds are tuned to the demands of the environment. And we are as much scientists as proper academic scientists when making decisions. The only thing that restricts us sometimes from arriving at proper conclusions is our working memory capacity, the knowledge that we can acquire, and our motivation. And this very last element is also partly responsible for dealing with fake information. There is this very specific concept of epistemic motivation, the need to avoid cognitive closure. This is the state when we can tolerate ambiguity, that we can tolerate different, sometimes opposing views, opposing attitudes, until we arrive at our own judgment. And we need to be aware that it's kind of a mental expenditure. We need to invest our time, resources, and motivation to analyze information, to process information, and to identify which of the bits is truthful and which of the bits is unreliable at all. So the first element is motivation and our awareness of the problems and awareness of the effort to be put into processing information and identifying untruthful content. Now, interestingly, in my most recent research project, which I developed with my students here with Royal Holloway and one of my colleagues, Gareth Thompson from London College of Communication, we analyzed how loneliness can contribute to the phenomenon of sharing fake information. And what we found out is that loneliness can contribute to spreading fake information, even though we are aware that what we are spreading is unreliable and untruthful. We use stimuli of untruthful content about COVID-19 vaccination that has been disseminated by one of the UK journalists on Twitter. So we used a number of tweets, untruthful tweets about COVID-19, and we asked people to what extent they were interested in sharing this. Prior to this question, we administered a loneliness measure to identify those people who felt lonely. Now, surprisingly, there was a very strong positive correlation and causal effect of loneliness and sharing fake information. More specifically, we found a particular item which was responsible for sharing fake information, and this item read, "There are people that I can talk to." That is, the fewer people that one can talk to were, the more they were inclined to share fake information, which kind of, to provide the final answer to your question, which should bring our attention to what some social media owners or regulators would tend to do, that is to cut people off of social media if they spread misinformation. Now, indirectly, obviously, our research may suggest that this is not the right way. Cutting off people of links with other human beings and creating this situation where someone does not feel can engage into meaningful conversations with others, not necessarily similar to the people who have similar opinions to that, but just in general, having this possibility of having someone to talk to, also on social media, seems a very important factor that would also contribute to understanding why people share misinformation.
So, as is kind of well known on this channel now, often we have quizzes to end our discussions, and this quiz is specifically centered around the topic of fake news. Now, what I've set for you is my amazing intern has, well, first of all, she's identified some real psychological findings. Don't necessarily expect you will be familiar with these studies. She's also generated some fake psychological findings. Now, I'll add some caveats to this, that first of all, we don't necessarily know they're actually fake. She may be a secret psychologist in disguise who has come up with some amazing rational fake findings that could actually be real. We don't necessarily know. There may be a finding out there that corroborates those. In the same way that when we say real psychological findings, we're just taking the very low threshold that means it was found to be identified in one study, and we'll take that as an assumption that it's true. So I'm going to read out certain findings, and I want you to guess whether it's real or fake. Now, if you give me an incorrect answer, you're going to hear this noise.
You are fake news.
Okay, that's Donald Trump, if you didn't hear that, saying fake news.
Right. Okay.
So I'm going to shame you for every time you cannot get the correct answer. So let's start with the first one. Food tastes better when someone else makes it. Do you think that's a real or fake psychological finding?
I believe this is a very real psychological finding.
Okay, great. Do you have any kind of reasoning as to why you thought it was real?
I think this is I can imagine, I don't know this study, but I can imagine that people may build this association of food being prepared by someone else as food being prepared at a restaurant. So anything that is given to them and there is no effort put into that can create this feeling of something tasting better.
Okay, I like that sort of theorizing. It's not quite the correct theorizing, but you are correct that it's a real psychological finding. The reason behind it is that when you are making your own food, apparently, because you spend a lot of time around the smells and aroma, you're already actually experiencing the food for a while before you actually end up tasting it. So really, the reason why food tastes better made by somebody else is that by the time you've actually sat down to have your delicious dinner, you've already experienced it for some time. So that first bite is actually not a first bite for you. However, if you say have got Uber Eats on the way and it's just arrived, you're only just experiencing that food now. So it's new and unimagined. It's not pre-consumed. So that's the real reason behind that phenomenon. Okay, let's go to the next finding. The next one is listening to listening to music of a faster tempo will make your average talking speed faster. So let's assume if you listen to kind of heavy metal, do you speak faster than, say, if you listen to a nice slow ballad?
Now, I know a study where listening to music with faster tempo led to more drinks, having more drinks at a party. So I believe this one also may be true.
Well, you know what's coming, right?
You are fake news.
You
Fake
are
news,
unfortunately propagating
No.
misinformation on this podcast, which we don't allow. I like your ideas, because when I saw this, and I wonder if my intern had a similar kind of similar thought process to you when generating this fake finding. I know of a study, for example, at least I think it didn't replicate, at least anyway, but it's kind of based around the idea of sort of social priming. So, for example, priming thoughts of the elderly makes people walk slower. Kind of seems like a similar sort of association. Yeah. And so you had a sort of similar sort of idea of a true finding and have applied it to this one. So it's possible that maybe if we did this experiment, we might actually find it to be a real one. Of course, though, social priming has quite a large issue around replication, so we might also find it wasn't true. Let's go to the third finding. So how about this one? People that enjoy gift giving score higher on scales of measuring narcissism.
Yeah, this also sounds plausible. I would say yes.
So
another Trump.
You are fake news.
You are getting trumped for that one, unfortunately. That was also a fake finding. But these are quite hard, to be honest, to get. I think if I didn't know the answers, I probably wouldn't be doing much better than you. Let's go to number 4. So, women are more drawn to true crime than men. Is this a real or a fake finding?
This one is really difficult because I have no idea how to connect it with any theory or any study that I have ever heard of. I don't think it is plausible. No.
You are fake news.
This is a real finding. I was actually quite some of these findings I was really quite amazed about. When you become an academic, you become very kind of focused on your own narrow area of research. So it's always interesting to learn a bit more about something else outside your area of research. So it is apparently a true phenomenon that women are more drawn to true crime than men. Now, the reasoning behind this, according to a series of studies, is it's driven by a fear of crime. That because women are perceived and are actually more at risk of violent crime than men, that actually listening and watching and consuming true crime may pose survival advantages. So it has a potential evolutionary mechanism. And according to a series of studies, they provided corroborating evidence for this sort of purpose, that there provides a potential survival fitness advantage, particularly for women who may be more liable to being victims of violent crime. That's
interesting. So you're saying that by reading or watching true crime, they are learning ways how to avoid it or how to deal with or in the difficult situations.
Yes, I'm not sure if the study elaborates whether that's at a conscious or unconscious level. I probably would imagine perhaps it's an unconscious process, but certainly I'll link the papers in the description, so anyone who wants to learn more about these findings can do so.
Very interesting.
Okay, let's go to the 5th finding, and then we'll get one more finding afterwards. Babies born during the night between midnight and 6 a.m. are more likely to pursue higher education. Is this a real or fake psychological finding?
Well, I hope it's not. I hope it's fake.
Well, you're correct. It is not true. So well done on getting that one correct. So the final finding that I have is people are more giving to others when the room they are in smells nice. Do people become more charitable when they're in a room that smells nice?
With some background in marketing, I know that different sensory tactics are now employed. I would imagine that this may be correct given the popularity of employing different, additional sense experiences for consumers in different shopping environments. So let's say that's correct.
It is indeed correct. I think it's probably along the similar sort of lines that you're outlining. The precise reason they give in the paper is that there is an association between physical and moral purity. And thus, the kind of physical purity of cleanliness, those kind of smells we associate, that kind of acts as, again, it's like a priming effect, that it also heightens the desire to do morally pure things. So it increases prosociality and charitable giving. So well done. You did quite well. I think you identified about half of them. Again, thank you, Michal, for joining us today, and I hope to have you back on at some point in the future.
Thank you for the invitation. It was fun, and most importantly, you have emphasized which of the studies were fake, which were not. So we are not contributing to sharing fake news. This is what I believe 100%.
Thank you for watching the Psychology Debrief. If you have any suggestions for new topics, quizzes, or any other content psychology related, feel free to get in touch via email or Twitter. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Bye!